Yeah, Benjamin. I think Benjamin Hutton. Okay, I'm starting the event. Let me come out to my browser.
All right, it says we're on air.
Good morning from the West Coast. I'm Jim Klein from the American Solidarity Party. Uh, Today I have with me Brian Carroll, a congressional candidate who ran on behalf of the American Solidarity Party. I say good morning because we're both on the West Coast. Brian,
Good
where are
morning,
you
Jim.
calling in from this morning?
Visalia, California. That's between Fresno and Bakersfield, 22nd Congressional District.
Well, I'm in my home in Seattle, and I guess it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon for those on the East Coast. Well, first of all, Brian, before we get started, I want to thank you on behalf of the party and the national committee. Thank you very much for your efforts in running for congressional candidate on behalf of the American Solidarity Party. I realize that involved a huge sacrifice of time and effort both by you and your family, and we're very appreciative of that.
Oh, I look at it as really a fun experience. I really enjoyed doing it.
Well, I'm glad you got something out of it. That's one of the things I want to be able to talk with you about this morning is what those experiences were. I think maybe what I'd like to do is start kind of, instead of in the campaign, maybe the steps leading up to the campaign. Can you tell us a bit about what ultimately led you to decide to run? But tell us a bit more about your thought process as you deliberated on that decision.
Well, I came to the Solidarity Party after 35 years as a family values Republican, and I had become more and more distressed as I saw the party drifting away from what I considered to be family values. And when at the end of 2015, I looked at the Republican candidates, and at that time there were about 20, and not a single one of them excited me. And so I said, there's got to be something else. And Bernie came along, and although Bernie was definitely pro-choice, he was also talking about getting money out of politics. And I began to realize that one of the first things that we had to do was get Planned Parenthood money out of politics. And so on that basis, I got very excited about Bernie. I left the Republican Party, registered as a Democrat, and I even happened to be on the East Coast, so I could be in Philadelphia during the convention. And when that was over, I said, all right, what would an ideal party look like? And within a few weeks, I stumbled upon some stuff about the Solidarity Party. And I said, that's it. So I joined. We had our California organizing convention that October. We got 55 people on a ballot, a list. If Matern and Munoz had swept California, my wife and I would have been casting California's electoral college ballots. And from there, it was, all right, if you're going to build a party, you have to run candidates. What can I run for? And during that process, my own congressman began to frustrate me more and more. And so I said, all right, I'm taking on Nunes.
Okay, so when did you come to that decision to take on Devin Nunes?
It was really a full year process because it started at that October convention as we talked about the need to run candidates. And first it was a question of, oh, all right, what do I run for? And the federal issues interested me more than the state issues at the time. And so I also had a friend, a Democrat, who was running for state senate in my area. I didn't want to run against my friend. And so I began to focus more and more on Nunes. But, you know, in your own life, there's things you have to get settled. Nobody is immediately ready to jump into something like that without trying to get everything else in order. Everything from the yard was a mess, and I don't think any of the neighbors would have supported me. Although the lady across the street told me she voted for me yesterday. And my wife's health and all the other issues that people have in their lives, those all had to be settled. I was concerned about the squabbles in the National Party. You don't want to run out in front of a party and then realize there's nobody behind you. So that was an issue. And so it wasn't really until November of 2017 that I said, yeah, I'm going to do this.
Well, let's just maybe step back in time a little bit for those of our members who may not know you. Can you give us a brief overview of your life biography, and so they kind of understand who the person was, Brian Carroll, that decided to ultimately run for Congress? Tell us about your major mileposts in your life.
Most of my growing up was in Los Angeles area. I did spend fourth grade year in Denver, Colorado. Went to public schools. I was very middle class, although most of my friends in high school were probably a little bit higher up the class than I. We were all middle class. 5 siblings. I was the oldest. And I went to community college and then to UCLA. Then got my teaching credential. In between UCLA and the teaching credential, I went to Europe and just drifted around for 3 months. Got down as far as Israel and Turkey, and just had a great experience. Came home, got married, got my teaching credential, moved to Central California because at that time we had a teacher glut and there simply weren't jobs anyplace else. So I took the first offer that came. And so Tulare County has been what called home since 1977. I did spend 11 years, 9 of those years in Columbia with Wycliffe Bible Translators teaching school. And I have now been teaching almost every year since 1975.
And you're still a professional. You remain a professional educator.
I'm still teaching. In fact, I just got a new assignment. I will be teaching both history and Spanish next year. This will be my first chance to teach Spanish, so that should bump my own Spanish up a notch.
Well, tell us a little bit about the political lay of the land locally. Devin Nunes is your congressional representative, your congressman. Politically, what is the situation in that district?
The district is divided between Fresno County and Tulare County. 2/3 of the voters are in Fresno County, which is a little bit more liberal than Tulare County, but it's 45% Republican district-wide and 35% Democrat, 3% Libertarian and some other groups, 22% I think independent, which I think actually helped me because I had to register on the ballot as no party preference. California does a weird thing where they wouldn't let us list as Solidarity Party unless we had about 60,000 members statewide. And
right.
So I think I probably benefited because there's probably only, when we started, there might have been 8, maybe 10 registered members of the party in the district, but there's a lot of independents. And so I may have picked people up just because I was listed as no party preference.
Yeah, I think a little bit later in our conversation today, we want to delve into running as an independent versus running ASP, what that challenges are when you're not allowed by the by the state or local law to use the ASP name. So I want to circle back to that, but let's talk a little bit as we go through this process of you deciding to run about your major opponent, the incumbent Devin Nunes. He must be somebody that you have some opinions on.
Well, for several years, I voted for him. He had no serious opposition. Some years he didn't even have token opposition. And it is a conservative area, lots of ranches and farms and things, and he has never had less than 63% of the vote. And so he just keeps getting reelected, and he's been there now since 2003, which means he has the seniority to be chairman of committees and things like that. And because he just keeps getting reelected, people until now have not spent a lot of time looking at him really closely. And then a year and a half ago, when he started being Trump's main cheerleader in Congress, a lot of people started to take a closer look, and they weren't real happy with what they saw.
And I assume that included you as well.
Correct.
But that by that time, it sounded like that had already followed your exodus out of the Republican Party into the Democrats very briefly, and then ultimately you found a home in the American Solidarity Party. How do you view your politics at this time in terms of trying to find a place that's comfortable for you?
Well, I can't imagine going back to either the Democrats or the Republicans. I'm very, very comfortable with the American Solidarity Party. I looked at some of the other groups that were kind of searching for some answers. I was nominated by brand new or somebody nominated me to brand new Congress. They never got back to me. There's no labels, and there's a bunch of other groups that are all trying to find some answers right now. And of all of them, I think the Solidarity Party is where I am most comfortable.
Okay, so let's maybe dovetail back into the campaign. You give us a window on your thinking the last week or two before you finally decided to make that plunge. What factors were you balancing in that decision?
Well, first of all, I knew I could only be a part-time candidate because I'm a full-time school teacher. And I knew I would have very little money. I knew that I have no real team. You called me one time and talked about having some people show up to help my team do literature distribution, and I had to tell you that I don't have a team. I'm a one-man operation. And so, you can't. I'm sorry, what?
Do you recognize going into the campaign that you weren't going to have an extensive campaign apparatus?
Correct. And so when you run like that and you are pioneering something, you know that the main goal is to build towards the future. I knew going in that I was going to lose this election. And I thought, all right, I'm not the perfect candidate, but losing election is within my skill set. I can do that. And so I said, I'm going to give it what I can, take it as far as I can get it. And I was really quite pleased. I beat the Libertarian, and I was not that far behind the two Democrats that didn't make it.
Yeah, we did notice you had some pretty good results. I want to kind of come back later in the interview too, and touch on that a bit in terms of your overall results, because we were a lot of us in the party were really pleased that you beat the pants off the Libertarian. That seemed like quite an accomplishment. But
by the way,
yeah,
the Libertarian and I part friends. Those of us who were challenging Nunes developed a certain camaraderie, and that's one of the things that I am pleased to take out of this election. One of those guys someday is going to be elected to something, and I'm going to be his friend. You build influence that way.
yeah. Well, let's talk about you decided to take the plunge. You decided to run, but there's a number of steps that have to go into running. Starting with you've got to get on the ballot. And you probably recognized pretty early getting on the ballot was going to present its own set of challenges. Tell us about your ballot access issues that you face and how you address those.
Well, it doesn't start with ballot access. It starts with creating bank accounts and getting IRS. I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's the
EIN.
Yeah, EIN number. And that, Form 1 and Form 2. And I thought I had that all set up. And then I realized there was also there are two more forms that 4-digit, I think, start with 88. And so that whole process, then registering with the FCC, and that involves a bunch of stuff. And when I first went to start a bank account, and I tried the very first day of Christmas vacation, because that whole December at school is crazy, and so from the time I went into a bank account until the time I actually had a bank account set up was like 6 weeks. And then I ordered checks and they sent them to the wrong address, so I never did write a check off the checks that I purchased. All those kinds of crazy things. And of course, at Christmas, everybody's busy. I was having some computer problems, and I do have a fellow that was helping me IT issues. But the flu went through his family, and then when we finally had a meeting set up, he had a crisis at work and had to spend that Saturday work on a computer at work. Those kinds of things slow everything down, and so the bank account was something that if I had to do over again, I would have set up an exploratory committee just for the federal forms and a bank account that I could have set up before I actually made the decision to run, and that would have streamlined things after I made the decision a whole lot.
Well, that's Brian. I appreciate you going into detail in that step, because I think that that business formation of a campaign is something that prospective candidates can really forget about. They get excited by wanting to go out and just start campaigning, not realizing whether it's a federal campaign like you enrolled in or even a state campaign, there are going to be complications in terms of filing with the state or federal election processes, the FEC, or there's usually state counterparts, and just what you ran into, just setting up a bank account. And you can't run a campaign without some money, right?
Correct.
And so I'm sorry that you got caught up in that bureaucratic nightmare, but this is why we're having the conversation for candidates, prospective candidates, to look at that and say, okay, what do I do? And I think your assessment now is pretty wise that you want to try to recruit a committee, hopefully of helpful people who can focus on those nuts and bolts financial steps, so you can start getting to the rest of the campaign. So, how long, all told, did that process of setting up the bank accounts and the reporting paperwork take?
Well, from the time that I started looking for a bank account until the time I actually had the account set up, I think was 6 weeks.
Yeah. So I think that's a lesson too for the party as we prepare materials in the future for candidates. A lesson for us would be to try to provide some kind of guidebook for candidates that include a section on that. I guess since that topic, came up, do you think a guidebook like that would be helpful? And what would you like to see covered in such a book or booklet or materials?
Well, first of all, it would need to be different for every state.
Correct.
Part of my problem was that because I was under federal rules and Desmond and Ed, well, Ed was under federal rules, but he was.
You're talking about Ed Rushman.
He was approaching things differently than I was. But Desmond was trying to comply with state rules, and I was trying to comply with federal rules. And so the information that we had to share with each other wasn't really applicable. And here in the district, like I say, we had, I think in the two counties, maybe 8 votes for Maturin Munoz. So I contacted those people and never heard back from any of them. And so there really wasn't a committee to work with.
Yeah.
And I did in September, when the local Right to Life organization had their annual banquet, I purchased a table and I invited several people who I had noticed a pattern that they tended to like my posts, my political posts. I thought, all right, these are people that might, be a team. And from those groups, I did get 2 people, my IT fellow and a woman who volunteered to be on the bank account with me and those kinds of things. But there really wasn't anybody who was actually going to be, out campaigning. Nobody knock on doors. I wound up walking in some parades, and that was good. I enjoyed them and got our name out there. But I don't know. I have no idea, where my votes actually came from. Did I actually get any votes from any of those? There's no way to know.
Right. That's part of it's probably more art than science in campaigning, as much as the political pundits
Right.
to say that they have formulas, and I'm sure they do have certain knowledge, but there's a lot of unknowns in this in terms of voter behavior, and they can crunch numbers all the day, but I don't know that it tells them how a specific campaign interaction leads to a vote or not. And I think most candidates that have done it realize you just go out and you campaign and you hope for the best. And in this case, you beat the Libertarians, so you obviously accomplished something. And as you pointed out, ran pretty closely behind some prominent Democratic candidates.
Let me read you some numbers, because this is just a quick calculation based on the reporting. May 16th, what had been spent. Nunes, if you divide the 3 million sum that he spent by the 69,000 votes he got, that's $45 a vote 2 weeks before the election, or 3 weeks before the election. Jans, who came in second, spent $33 a vote. Bliatut, who I think he wound up with about 6 or 7% of the vote, spent $35 per vote. Franco, who was about 3.5%, spent $10 a vote. And as near as I can calculate, if you take out the actual registration fee, the $1,800 it cost me to get on the ballot, my actual campaign came out to 38 cents a vote. So,
So we need to get you some more money the next time.
well, except that the Franco and Bliatu spent a great deal of money and had very little to show for it.
Yeah.
So money is not the whole thing. And even Nunes, who basically doesn't show up in the district and depends on lots and lots of signs on every corner. He's got the name recognition, and he still felt he had to spend $45 a vote. There is no way that Solidarity Party candidates are ever going to compete at that level. If we play by their rules, we are not going anywhere. We have to invent our own rules.
Okay. Well, we'll probably get back to that. But let's maybe talk a little bit about, you mentioned getting out on the campaign trail and going to some parades. What were some of the campaign events you did? Tell us a little bit about those.
The first one, I can't remember the order here. There was a Chinese New Year Day parade up in Fresno, and it cost me $100 to get entrance. And I had, at that point, been thinking that I would be able to recruit some people, and we would, get it. I do a little parade at the junior high every year for Chinese New Year, and we have a little dragon and stuff. And I thought, well, we'll get some people up there and we'll run my dragon around. And that didn't work. I couldn't find a single person to go with me. And so I borrowed a big gong from the band teacher and went up there, set up a table, and as I unloaded my gong, mother comes up with her kid and says, "Hey, can my son hit your gong?" And I said, "Sure." And so she took a picture, and of course, the picture had my message underneath the gong, and I'm thinking, gold mine, and probably over 100 parents took pictures of their cute kids with my sign. And it was totally unplanned. I had no idea that would happen. But it was one of those things where I just said, "Okay, Lord, my plan failed. Let's go with yours." And it worked. Then there was a candidate forum in Reedley, which is halfway between here and Fresno. Well attended. Nunes did not show up, and Jantz, the leading Democrat, did not show up. So it was the four of us, the Libertarian, 2 Democrats, and myself. And that was a good experience. We got TV coverage. We got met a bunch of people that, although they probably voted for somebody else in the election, they are a valuable network. And I'm really glad that I know those people now. And I think I did okay. I know I got the best laugh lines, and I don't, like I say, I have no idea where I picked up my voters, whether I won any voters that night, but it was a valuable experience.
Well, what seemed to pick up laugh lines for you?
My best laugh line, and the other candidates were about half my age. And so I did a little shtick where I talked about maturity. I've got more life experience than these people, and I've been through my midlife crisis, and now I would like to help Devin Nunes have his. And that just busted everybody up. So that was a good one. At a later campaign forum with the other candidates, we were asked the question, Devin Nunes doesn't meet with constituents, and what would you do to make yourself open to constituents? And so I said, well, I understand that Nunes came down to do a town hall in 2010 on repealing Obamacare, and he thought he was going to be the conquering hero, and he walked into a very hostile crowd, and he left saying, I'm never going to do this again. And I said, I deal with hostile crowds all the time. My whole life has been training for this. I teach junior high. And that was a big laugh line.
Everybody can relate to that.
Everybody can relate to that. And so those were good experiences. Those were fun. And I must have gotten some votes someplace because people voted for me that I don't know. I'm sure of that.
So what, you went to these candidate forums. You had a chance to meet your fellow candidates. Let's talk about that. First of all, did you ever get to meet Devin Nunes? Did he ever show up anywhere where you were at?
No one is really sure that he really exists. He may just be kind of like the moon landing that was created in Hollywood, He's in the news, but nobody in the district has seen him. So no, I did not get to meet him. Okay. I was in Washington, D.C. A year ago, April, and did go into his office. I know that's a real place. And I talked to some of his people. They were very friendly. And I was told that I could actually meet with, I was back there for the climate march. And I was told I could meet with him if I could meet late afternoon. And unfortunately, I was late for my airplanes. I couldn't stick around, so I don't know if I actually would have been able to meet with him or not. Mm-hmm. I have met each of the other candidates. Jance, who will run against Nunes in November, a very personable fellow. I've talked to him very briefly twice, and he was on the podium with me once. He's a very attractive young man. Franco and Bliatut, who I appeared with twice and met each of them some other times as well. I want to stay in touch with them. Really nice guys, very impressive. Bliatut organizes or has led nonprofit healthcare, and he really would have been helpful to have in Congress as Congress tackles healthcare. Mm-hmm. And Franco has been very active in immigration issues and, again, real likable guys. And I would like to think that they would stay on my friends list for a long time.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well,
what was your question?
Well, I was gonna lead into a different subject area, unless you had more to say about meeting with.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so we had touched back a bit ago about the formation process for your campaign, and you talked about the difficulties and hurdles regarding the financial instruments and the financial record keeping requirements. And I had mentioned before that the ballot access issues, and you pointed out correctly financial issues preceded all those. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the ballot access issues, recognizing they're different in every state, but it also seems like there's some commonalities in that third parties or independents have some challenges before they can even get their name before the voters. Can you tell us what your challenges were and what the steps were that you had to take to get onto the ballot?
The fee to get onto the ballot was $1,840, of which I could, for each signature collected, reduce that by 85 cents. And so 2,000 signatures would have eliminated it. And I naively thought I could get 2,000 signatures. In fact, when I got the forms, I went straight to Staples to get copies made, and that was my first mistake. I should have just figured I would run them off at home as I needed them, because most of them never got used. And it was Christmas vacation. If it had been a day earlier, I could have distributed some among the teachers at my school, and I'm sure I would have gotten some help there. But during the Christmas vacation, you don't see the normal people. I saw a lot of family from out of the area. I didn't really see people that could pass them for me. And of course, I wanted to focus on family that were from out of state. I wasn't in a campaign mode during Christmas till after they all left and went home. Then there was a couple days of illness. Those kinds of things slowed it down. And by the time I went to a rally, the local, mainly Democrats, have every Tuesday or once a month Tuesday demonstration outside of Nunes' office, and I took my petitions to that. But everybody there had already signed Jance's petitions, and you could only sign one. I eventually turned in probably close to 180 signatures, of which probably only maybe 60 or 70 of them were validated. The rest of them were all ruled invalid for some reason. And they don't tell you why, but I suspect it may just be, people have misremembered their addresses, or they have, in the process of scribbling their signature, it doesn't look enough like the registered signature. When you're out on the street and people are, trying to sign on your clipboard and stuff, they just don't get it right. And so those didn't count. And so I at least had enough. The minimum was 40 signatures, and I did get the minimum. But I did not get enough to reduce in any significant way the payment.
So ultimately, how much cash did you need to come up with?
That's something I have to go back and check, because when I went in, they had me sign a check for the full amount and then said that the California Secretary of State would refund it. And I don't remember ever getting the refund. So I'm going to have to go back and check my bank statements and see if they ever actually gave me back something.
You might want to use that for your 2020 account.
Yeah. Well, I think if I understand correctly, I would have to close this one, and if I choose to run for something in 2020, open up a new one. I think I have to zero this one out.
Okay.
That's what I think I saw. And I can do a variety of things with that. I actually have some sitting in there because I had planned to do a blitz the last weekend on Facebook, boosting Facebook posts. And Facebook came up with this thing like 8 days before the primary. They came up with this thing and said, well, if you're going to do political posts, you have to register as a political site. And to do that, we have to verify your address. And so you register and you send a copy of your driver's license or passport, and then you wait for something to come in the mail to that address to prove that you're actually living at that address. And that could take, 7 to 10 days. And it wasn't going to, I couldn't do it before the primary.
So you ran into, Brian, it seems like a lot of hurdles at different stages, both at the outset and as you progress through all the way to the end. Do you think that had you been able to hire at least a part-time campaign manager, that might have really helped in being able to plan ahead and address these hurdles before they became as difficult as they were? Is that something you looked into? Is that something you think you should have done in retrospect, or why not?
I did get some advice from I told you I had a friend who was running for state senator as a Democrat, and he's kind of runs for something every year. And so he's got a lot of experience, and he gave me some good advice. I asked him if I should hire a campaign treasurer. And he said that they work different ways. The one that he had hired was $450 a month on a retainer. Well, I mean, obviously, I never had the kind of funds to hire somebody like that on a retainer. And he said, otherwise, you call and maybe you get somebody who knows something, and maybe you don't. Maybe it's a new guy that doesn't know anything, and you pay by the hour. So I was never in a situation where I could consider that. And I don't even know where I would go to get a campaign manager. The guy, Jance, who will run against Nunes, was chosen by some outside money interests. They had a cattle call last summer, and 7 people showed up, and this was mostly, excuse me, I think Silicon Valley money, and they spotted Jance and said, that's our guy. They hired him, Bay Area campaign staff, manager and stuff, and took over his campaign before any of the other of us really got into it. I think out of the 7 people who showed up for that, 5 of them decided not to run at all. So I'm not sure how you go about getting a campaign manager if you don't have some kind of money to start with.
Well, does seem like a chicken and egg problem in terms of money. I mean, I think you had indicated you were never going to be able to compete with the campaigns that were bringing in $35 a vote or more. But did you come to the recognition that it does take a certain amount of cash to be able to get a formal campaign really launched?
Yes. At the point where you say that you are going to win the election, then you've got to commit those kinds of resources. And I'm not aware that at this point the Solidarity Party is ready to commit those kind of resources to anybody's campaign. We're not there yet. And that means that we are running primarily to get ourselves known, to build connections, to learn the ropes. And there's a certain amount of freedom that comes with going into an election that way. You don't have to follow all the rules. You don't have to live in the same box. For example, the candidate forums that I was in, each of the other guys showed up in dark suit and tie, and I showed up in a green guayabera. All right. I'm saying to the voter, I'm different. I stand out. I am not part of what everybody else does. I play by my own rules. And I think the voters appreciate that. There's so many people fed up with politics as usual that they're looking for something out of the box. And so that gives you a certain amount of freedom to do some interesting experiments.
Well, I also noticed you wore your orange vest from time to time.
That was something that I tried the very first thing I went to was a demonstration for DACA students. And I had not announced to anybody that I was running. I thought, okay, this orange vest will be a campaign symbol. And I eventually gave it up. It didn't hang right. It was awkward. I'm glad I tried it, but I did not continue with it.
Well, I've expressed my own personal view on that, Brian, which I didn't tell you, but I'm not a proponent of the color orange. I know there's a number of people in the party that seem to like that color because it relates to things going on in Europe, but I'm not sure it's a good design color, but it definitely seemed like it made you stand out. When I saw the pictures, you could see, well, this guy stands out, and I guess you gave that a try.
In my mind, it was like a workman's jacket.
Yeah.
And somebody said, "Well, why are you wearing a hunting jacket?" And I thought,
It did
"Well,
look a lot like a
I'm not
hunting.
a hunter. That's not
Yeah.
that's not the image I want to project." And so you play with symbols and see what works.
Yeah, try. Well, you tried things, and then we see what works. What the American Solidarity Party? We, as you mentioned, you and I spent some time in the vetting process, and you haven't mentioned yet, but I had um, gotten Bob McCarty of our California party assigned to provide assistance, and the party also tried to and did provide you some financial assistance, largely to bridge the gap in terms of that filing fee. But what were the helpful things you thought ASP did for you, and what additional things would you have liked to have seen the party do?
Well, obviously, the party did send. It was between $800 and $900. I don't remember the exact amount, and that was at a critical time when I needed to file. And there was the other uh, donations I got, which I think are primarily party people, but it went CrowdPack assignment or a CrowdPack page. And for that, I have to credit Mitzi, who was just out there all the time reminding people, go contribute to Brian's race. And so she was very helpful, not just in that, but in she was an administrator on my Facebook page. And I didn't realize that you could boost posts. And I kept seeing posts getting boosted by Mitzi. And I said, "Hey, what is she doing? And can I do it?" So that was very helpful to me to just learn some tricks from her in that. Elizabeth designed my sign, and we were originally thinking of printing off handouts and things. We never did print off a handout. The only handout I had was something I ran off on my home printer, all text with none of Elizabeth's graphics, but I used those graphics on my pages, my web pages, and those were very helpful. And so I would say that Mitzi and Elizabeth were the big helps that I got from the party, and then the donations that came to the CrowdPack were the most helpful things I got.
Well, I appreciate that, Brian. I think there were a number of comments during the campaign within the party as to how much financial support we should be lending candidates. And I'm not sure there's a full appreciation the members have about the amount of money that the Solidarity Party has in its treasury. And it's a finite amount. And I think, as you do correctly point out, party resources were used to facilitate additional individual donations outside the party. And it's one of the things I've said inside the party that candidates, unfortunately, as much as they may want the national party to be the mainstay of their support, that as we move forward, realistically, it just can't work that way. I don't think the party is ever going to have enough money, at least in the near to intermediate term, to have those kind of bank accounts. We have to hope candidates can find ways to raise money. But certainly, as Mitzi did in this case, motivating the members to make additional donations above and beyond their commitments to the party. That sounds like that was a valuable resource for you to get some additional needed cash at a critical time.
Yeah, and I really loved the design that Elizabeth did for me. I told her I wanted the colors of an orange grove, and she took it from there. And I managed to blow her design up to a sign that I mounted on top of my car, and drove that around for the 4 months or 5 months, whatever it was here. And that was really my only sign. The other candidates had 4x8 signs on every corner and in people's yards. And the only sign I had was the one on my car, and I made a second one to pull on a wagon in parades. And those were the only signs I had.
Now, when you eventually got on the ballot, and I think we've touched on this lightly, which is you were on the ballot as an independent.
Called no party preference, yeah.
No party preference is how they call it in California. So, and what that means, as I understood it, California, like my home state of Washington, has adopted this top two system. A little bit of a not really that well known, but a little bit of this is a fallout from some Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decisions that talk about how major parties have to regulate the rights of third parties, and major parties have actually set this top two candidate out in a way that I think marginalizes the third parties, because it's very hard to get your name on there, and then you're out at the primary stage, right? Because only the top two go forward, and it makes it very hard for smaller parties to get that more critical November access. But that being what it is, you weren't able to run on the ballot under the name of American Solidarity Party. Did that present some particular challenges or opportunities in terms of being no party preference, when really your goal, what you had told me at the outset, and I believe to be true, is you wanted to promote the American Solidarity Party? So how do you do that? How do you accomplish that when you're on the ballot as no party preference?
Well, it was disappointing that we couldn't put it on the ballot. And that was the original idea to get in. As I got in and became more and more disgusted with Nunes, it did reach a point where I said, you know what, I want somehow to get Nunes out of there, and that became part of the goal. But I did, on my webpage and other places, I talked about the party. One of the things that there was a fellow up in Fresno who runs a web-based news program. And I was able to go up there, and for $100, I did two interviews, two different interviewers. One was like 11 minutes, the other was 13 minutes. And they did an excellent job of tossing me questions that allowed me to talk about the Solidarity Party. And I had a little chart showing how we differed from the Democrats and Republicans, a little spreadsheet, dots for the different things. I don't know, maybe you've seen that. Those interviews cost me $100 and gave me the rights to post them on YouTube. And I think probably that was my best opportunity to advertise the Solidarity Party.
Well, the American Solidarity Party exists on the ideological spectrum, maybe in ways that aren't easy for the left-right continuum to easily classify, because maybe they don't just exist right in the middle of that spectrum or on one side.
Well, this was two-dimensional or three-dimensional kind of thing.
Three-dimensional. So we're really talking about a three-dimensional spectrum might better capture ASP. How did you communicate that, or were you able to effectively communicate that in your materials?
I don't know if you've seen those interviews that are on YouTube. This is interviewer's name is Mike Briggs, and actually he ran against Nunes in 2003, and we hit it off real well. But in a 13-minute interview, I was able to show my graphic. They put it on the screen, showing that you've got the Democrats down here in socially liberal and economically liberal, and the Republicans up here conservative in both those areas. Libertarians down here, and we're over here. And I thought that in like I say, a 13-minute interview, I was able to explain that in a way that people could understand. If you haven't seen that, go back and look for it.
That seems like something to look for. And I don't know to what, I think you've pretty well captured sort of the ideological lay of the land there, reference ASP and how they're anchored or not to other parties. But did you get into, there's been discussions in the party about distributivism and communitarianism and sort of where the ASP may lie in some of the economic policy issues. Did you get to communicate that, and what kind of feedback did you get on that?
I did not get into that. I stressed the pro-life for the whole life. Since Nunes helped write the House healthcare bill that the Senate did not go along with, but that bill put a lifetime cap on what a person could get from insurance, even private insurance, and a problem delivery, the baby could have hit the lifetime cap before they ever got to the hospital. And so I hit the fact that that's not pro-life. My Republican congressman who claims to be pro-life keeps doing things that are not consistent with being pro-life. And so I spent a lot of time hitting that.
Well, Brian, I appreciate that input in terms of the whole life message. It sounds like that may have resonated. We're at the point where we're sort of wrapping up this hour-long interview, but I have to, I want to finish by looking to the future. What are your plans for 2020? And do you think you're going to take another run? And what can we do to help you in that?
Well, first would be prayer. I don't think I have running out of my system. And I have told people that I will make some kind of decision at Thanksgiving. I want to see what happens in the November elections. If Chance should beat Nunes, it would be a very different run than if I'm running against Nunes again. I have to think through that. I'm continue to watching my wife's health and how that would affect her. I have pondered. There have been some people who've suggested that I did such a good job of losing this election that it might be a stepping stone to losing something bigger in 2020. And I'm pondering that, processing it, but I'm not going to make any decisions before Thanksgiving.
Well, I guess there's a lot of decisions are being made right now, and some of these pertain to the future of the American Solidarity Party itself. But we do, again, closing as I started, I just want to thank you again, not just for your time in coming out today and sharing your lessons with the party, but again, for the sacrifice you made for running for office. So we very much appreciate this. And I think we're going to bid our viewers goodbye for the day. But thanks for joining us, Brian.
Thank you, Jim.